You've written enough that you know you need to do some planning for your writing to improve, for it to be better, for your outcome to be more of what you imagine in your head. And you also know that professionals plan, novices play. So you want to up or alter your planning game. And when I say planning, when I say outlining, I'm really talking about the same thing. I'm not talking about a big full-blown outline like whatever detail-oriented thing you might be thinking of. What I'm talking about is sitting down and actually planning and thinking through the elements necessary to tell a good story. In the broadest sense, it's really just a written plan of attack. That's all you're doing. You're just planning things out before you jump into it. So I'm going to give you a few strategies for outlining, for planning. And hopefully one of these might be helpful to you if you're thinking about upping your outline and planning game or altering a little bit. Because ultimately, there's not one right way to do it. The right way to do it is what works for you. So your task is really to what are all the ways that people outline, and let me pick and choose the ones that work for me. And so I'm going to give you just a couple of ideas and different ways to outline and strategies to do that today. And hopefully you can kind of pick and choose ones that are going to help you step up your outline and your planning game. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like if you're finding value. Please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for doing that. There's also some links below. Be sure to check those out. Let's jump in. I just mentioned this, but I want to mention it again because I want to make sure that you understand. Not everyone outlines the same. No two writers outline the same. I've never met anybody else that outlines the exact same way that I do. And the way I outline changes from project to project. Sometimes it's project dependent of why I outline a certain way. Sometimes it's just my work ethic and my work mode. So I'm going to talk to you about some different strategies so you pick and choose which are the ones that are going to best help you. I will also say that there are some benefits to all of these strategies that I'm going to share with you. So don't just dismiss one or another. Understand that there are benefits and pros and cons to each of them. So whichever outline method you choose, there's some cons associated with it. If you know that ahead of time, it helps you make a better decision. Let's start with the group that doesn't outline hardly at all. This is a group, sometimes you might have heard this phrase, the pantsers or seat of your pantsers. These are the people that just sit down and they start writing. The only planning they've done is just thinking about it. And there's some value in just sitting and thinking and trying to think through the story and imagine it. I've even heard some people describe their planning process as I sit down until I can imagine and see the whole movie play out in my head. And once I see that, then I write it. The people that tend to use this method, though, are one of two groups. Either professionals who've been doing it a while and they have a really good sense and instinct for story and pacing. They understand a lot of the elements that you need to tell a good story. And so they can, in many ways, just kind of sit down and start writing. So if you start getting advice from writers who've been doing it for a while about outlining, a lot of them might say, well, I just sit down and write. Well, they sit down and write because they've worked at the craft long enough to know and have really good story instincts, to know what works, to know what doesn't. So when they're writing it, they know if it's good. They know if it's going in the right direction. The other group that tends to do this method are people that are just starting out, people that are brand new. I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to write a screenplay. I've read a book, I'm just going to sit down, I know what it is, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a story. And 200 pages later, they're wondering why their script isn't that good, or why people don't like it, or what do you mean nobody's going to read it if it's over 120 pages? Well, it's because that's not how it works in the industry, right? You got to show that you can play within the rules and the parameters. So if you're a new writer, I would highly recommend you not be a pantser. Once you've done it for a while, once you've got 10, 20 stories under your belt, like you've written 10 or 20 screenplays full length, okay, now if you want to experiment with it, go for it. But you will have developed your story sense a lot better and will know what's going to work and what's not. Before you even sit down to write, you'll know if this is going to be good. So if you don't know that yet, I'm going to say try to avoid this one. The benefit with being a pantser, though, is you kind of end up writing an unpredictable story. In a lot of ways, that's really good. So this is why more experienced writers can kind of do that. And what happens, I'm going to kind of talk through some of these things. So we're starting with pantsers. I'm going to talk through different strategies to do it that's much more detail oriented. And you will find that good and successful writers, what they do is they start up here, they move all the way down to the end, and then they start backing off and they find what works for them. So some of them come all the way back to pantser, some of them are outlining just a little bit, some of them are still outlining a lot. And it depends where you're writing. If you're writing for TV or you're writing, you've been hired to write a script, you're going to have to do a lot more planning because people want to vet the story at different stages. So you have to learn at least how to outline a little more strategically. So let's move on to the next group. The next group are people that are called gardeners. These are people that they plan, but then they just kind of tend the garden. So I kind of have a general idea of what's going to happen. I kind of know the general direction I'm going, but let's just get into it and see what happens and see what grows. If I plant this seed and this one and water it in this way and give it enough time, what stories start to sprout? What things start to happen? This is a little more structured than pantsers. Okay, so gardeners at least have an idea. They have mostly a trajectory. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go this direction and we're going to do these things. I'm going to try to make sure I've got the right pieces necessary, but I'm not going to worry about all the details yet. I'm kind of fill in the blanks as I go. I don't know who all the characters are. I know who some of them, but not all of them. I know what some of their backgrounds are, but I don't even know the name of some of these characters that I know I'm going to meet in the second act. I have no idea what their name is. I don't even know what they do. So I'm just going to meet them when I meet them. That's a gardener. Outlines from gardeners tend to be more like lists or kind of one piece of paper or one note card or a group of note cards, but no more than like 10. It's just the vague generalities of here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to go on. Here's the general trajectory of the story. Pretty loose, right? I mean, there's lots of blanks. There's lots of things that can happen. The story can still kind of go in some direction, but we still kind of ultimately know what's going to happen. A story is about someone who wants something badly. They're having trouble getting it. They get it or they don't. A gardener knows exactly what the answer to that question is. They know, does the character get it or not? A pantser doesn't know. So this is helpful because we have a direction, but it's also kind of helpful because we don't know all the details, which can be a detriment. And sometimes you start chasing rabbits and you create a character and suddenly that character is more interesting than another character and it just starts to derail the whole thing. So you do have to kind of be aware when you're gardening what kinds of things you're growing. Are you letting weeds pop up and other stuff? You just really have to be careful. The last group are the architects. These are the people that sit down and they plan it meticulously. So we sit down and we start thinking through what are all the story beats that we've got to have? What are all the character beats? Who are the main characters? Is this one going to move? Yes or no? What's their character arc? Okay, this one's going to move, but this one is not. And what are all those moments? And they plan all of them and everything's figured out. So here's the character beats, here's the story beats, and now we're going to start putting them together and we're going to do this and do that. Outlines for architects, though, look a little different. One, they're a lot more detailed. So they might have a note card for every scene and note card for each character. It's a different color for this character and a different one for this one. And we have our character beats outlined. We have our story beats outlined and we start doing it. And there's a big wall and we start putting this card with this one and this one over here and matching things up and moving things around and making sure it's all right. And then we're going to take that and then we write out what's called a synopsis. So we're going to write out almost in paragraph form where it's almost like a short story. Each paragraph is like a scene. So here's this scene, here's this scene, here's the scene, and they detail and they give detail in each paragraph of who's in it, what's happening. It might even include a line of dialogue. If there's something they're hearing in their head, oh, this character definitely says this and they say it this way, it might get included there. Not a lot, but sometimes. And summaries like this, synopses like this, can be anywhere from 10 to 40, 50 pages, depending on how detailed the architect is being with their outline. So maybe you're like, okay, I've heard people using note cards. How does that work? Typically a note card is what the scene is and a little description of what happens in the scene. Like that's what's on the card. And then you have note cards for characters. And typically each character is a different color of card. So your main character is one color and the supporting character is a different one. And you figure out what are all the character beats for them to go through the story. And then you just start matching them up. So you're putting them on a wall and you're matching this with this, with this, with this. That's a common way to do it. Now, there's a lot of people that do different things. They'll use cork boards or sequences or other kinds of ways to organize their note cards, and all of those are fine. What they're doing though as an architect is they are meticulously planning each thing. And what happens then, the writing is much faster. So if you just step back for each of these three things, the architects, the gardeners, the pantsers, okay? The architects are spending a lot of time planning, but their writing is really fast. I don't have to spend a whole lot of time writing because I've already worked out all the details. I don't have to think about it. I'm just kind of like transcribing what this scene is, what this one is, what this one is, putting in the right format, boom, 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 boom. I can write them out of order. I can do all kinds of things because, hey, it's all planned out, it's organized. A gardener, they might jump around a little bit, but they don't spend a whole lot of time planning, but it takes them a little bit longer to write a coherent story. A pantser has no time planning, and they're just going to be writing and trying to figure it out. And for different people at different stages in your career, different things will work for you. So don't knock the architects because you're a gardener or a pantser, but you do need to understand what the benefits are to the different ways of organizing and structuring how to go about writing a screenplay, because a screenplay has a lot of moving parts. It's really like a house of cards. You have all these little pieces and you start stacking them, and all of a sudden if you put this one card this way, the whole thing collapses. Or you build the whole thing, you've used all the cards in the deck and we've got our house, and you're like, do I need this card? And you pull one out. Nope, everything's still there. What about this one? You pull another card out. Nope, it's all still there. But then you go and pull another card out and the whole thing collapses, right? So it's like putting a big puzzle together. So there's a lot of benefit in being an architect. Now, are you going to be as surprised about the story? Well, maybe not, depending on how you've approached the planning of it. So that's the typical knock of people that do a lot of planning is, well, your story just doesn't feel as exciting. It's not as vibrant. Well, all that stuff was done in the planning stage, not in the writing stage. And so we're going to plan the story. So I know I've got the story. I'm going to figure out how I want to tell it. Then I'm going to write it. And now I'm going to fix it and try to add in all the little pieces I need. And you kind of have to do all of those things depending on where you are at. I mean, you're going to plan a little bit. And even if you're a pantser, you've thought about it a little bit before you sit down to start writing. So you have some notion of what you want to do and what you want to accomplish. The task is, can you accomplish it or not? And that's really where planning helps, is it helps make sure that whatever vision you have in mind is what comes out on the page when you're done. So you have this idea for a story. You have this vision for it. You know, here's what I want it to look like. But when you write it, it's really far away from where you think it should be or where you want it to be. Maybe you need to increase how much you plan. Maybe you need to move a little bit more toward an architect. And the closer you start to get to where what you envision is what you end up on the page, now you're starting to get a good story sense. Now you're starting to have good instincts. And if you're doing that, maybe you want to start to back off a little bit. Most professionals, not all, but most professionals land somewhere between gardener and architect as I've described them. So they plan a lot, but not all of it. I mean, I know what scenes I need, but I don't know all the characters I'm going to meet. I know the main ones, but I don't know all of them. And a lot of professional writers do that. If you work in TV, though, or again, if you're working on assignment, you're going to have to be more architectural in your planning because people are going to want to vet your story at different stages. So you have to know how to work within that system. My recommendation, especially if you're new, is start trying to move more toward an architect. Learn a little bit more about structure. Learn how to plan. Learn how to organize. That will help you close the gap between what you're seeing in your head and what ends up on the page. So find something. It doesn't mean you gotta go buy 10,000 note cards or whatever. Don't go crazy like that. But it does mean maybe you want to start moving towards something like that. Maybe you want to create lists. Maybe you want to do other things that will help you kind of plan and articulate, even if it's a little bit. So I would say if your vision doesn't match your output, then start trying to plan a little bit more, move more toward an architect. Once your vision and your results start to be pretty close, now you can start to kind of play. Do I want to not plan as much or plan even more? And some people want to plan even more because it makes their story better. Some people want to plan less because it makes their story better. It's up to you, so you got to choose which are the pieces that work for you to help you tell a great story. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell, all those things. Again, I really do appreciate you watching. Thank you for doing that. And when you tell a story, you should be planning a little bit, okay? Plan a little bit, so do some planning. But when you tell a story that matters. See you later.